Hey there guys, alright, today we are back with another Armchair Historian video. It's been a while. This time we are going to be watching the invasion of Poland from the Polish perspective. We're going to see how the Poles got completely abandoned by their allies. Yay, fun times, right? And also then invaded by their fellow Slavs. Anyways, got nothing else to actually, I'm gonna try something new here. I'm gonna see if this drives more. I do have a gaming channel where I have been uploading my Twitch VODs, old streams. I'm currently going through and uploading the Mass Effect 3 playthrough I have done. That was all the way back in May when I streamed that. Make sure links are always down below for the gaming channel, and then of course if you want to go ahead and follow me twitch.tv/RyanLive. That's where I currently am playing through the new game plus PS5 Ghost of Tsushima, and we are also playing through Divinity 2 Original Sin, or well, Divinity Original Sin 2. Great time. You guys should be sure to go down to the links below, subscribe to the gaming channel, and go follow me over. Much appreciated. Anyways, let's go ahead, dive right into the video of the invasion of Poland. Words are hard.
In the suburbs of Warsaw, a veteran sits alone by the fireplace. The dying embers illuminate his stoic face, and the occasional flashes of light pierce the threadbare curtains covering the windows. He would be out there right now if he could. Sadly, the army has little use for maimed soldiers, even in situations as desperate as this. Having fought alongside the forces of the German Empire in the Great War, this veteran can scarcely believe that they are now coming to destroy his home.
And can you really scarcely believe it? I feel like if you know anything about the Nazi, paid any attention to the news. Actually, I don't know what the news would have been like for Poland at the time. Maybe the radio, newspaper, or something maybe said something. Well, actually, no, they didn't have the radio, did they? The newspaper. Yeah. Poland didn't have the radio. It was just like new. Like just Britain at the 1939. America probably. I don't know. But I feel like if you paid attention to any of the news, this buildup of aggression from Germany could have been expected. Unless, of course, you know, you're a veteran and you don't pay it. Then that makes sense.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian.
Hi, Griffin Johnson. I'm
Today's
Ryan
video,
Peterson.
the invasion of Poland from...
I'm stupid. Somehow, I wrote a thesis, and I don't know how I did.
From the Polish perspective. The rarely covered story of calamity and betrayal that started the Second World War. During the invasion, miscommunication within the Polish ranks led to many unnecessary casualties. Fortunately, data protection services like
you tricked me with a smooth transition.
Born from the ashes of the Great War, Poland was a nation beset by enemies. The entire map of Eastern Europe had been redrawn after the war, and although Poland was the largest and strongest of these new countries, it was dwarfed by the superpowers on the horizon. To the west, there was Germany, frustrated by the Polish corridor cutting off its access to East Prussia. To the east, there was the Soviet Union, seething from its loss in the 1919-1920 Polish-Soviet War, desperate to secure its future.
Soviets got their fucking asses kicked in that one.
As a sovereign state, Poland entered into a defensive alliance with France in 1921. However, this distant ally offered scant protection against Soviet aggression, and Poland began investing heavily in its eastern defenses. It was only after Poland's foreign minister, Józef Beck, secured a non-aggression pact with the USSR in 1932 that tensions seemed to ease. Then the unthinkable happened. Germany, that supposedly humbled shell of a nation, suddenly burst back onto the scene. Led by Adolf Hitler's National Socialist Party, this resurgent and increasingly militant country now had its eyes dead set on the ethnically divided territories torn from it by the Treaty of Versailles. But once again, Beck stepped up to defuse the situation, wrangling another non-aggression pact from Germany in 1934. However, this house of cards came crashing down just a few years later, after Hitler seized the German ethnic Sudetenland in October in 1938.
This map animation that they've got going on, so smooth. I like the design. Colors are it's easy to understand the map here. I mean, it's just an easy map to read. The borders are nice and clean and crisp. Job, Arm. Fast.
Poland used it as a precedent to annex.
I am a sucker for nice, crisp clean borders on map. Fucking love that.
Założa, a Polish ethnic region in Czechoslovakia. This was a monumental blunder and caused both Britain and France, who saw the move as an act of aggression, to reconsider their support of Poland. Seeing an opportunity
that's not talked about much when it comes to the pre-World War II.
Open up, Germany submitted a list of demands to Poland that included annexing the Free City of Danzig.
Free City of Danzig was an ethnically German semi-autonomous city-state that existed in 1920 and 1929.
And constructing an extraterritorial road and railway through the Polish corridor. Losing Danzig would have cut off Poland almost entirely from the sea, and a German railway could have later been used to justify the seizure of the entire corridor. Thus, Beck refused Hitler's demands, denouncing them as tantamount to a renunciation of Polish sovereignty. Beck also refused to negotiate with the increasingly belligerent Soviets and spent most of the next year campaigning for Western support in the event of hostilities, which he now saw as inevitable. As tensions escalated, plans were drawn up to defend against an attack from the north and west. However, they had to be immediately reworked after Germany completely annexed Czechoslovakia in
but that's a
March of 1930.
A mountainous border there. I feel like you don't really have to fortify that as much.
Which stretched the Polish-German border much further to the south. Suddenly, Poland had to worry about every point on the compass. Later that month, on March 31st, Poland formed a tentative military alliance with.
The alliance was secured just in time. A month later, Hitler officially repealed the non-aggression pact Beck had negotiated with him just a few years earlier.
With both Britain and France, with the former promising to support Poland's independence. By August 1939, Hitler was seeking any pretext to justify an invasion of Poland as panzers massed along the border. Marshal Edvard Ritz-Schmigel, commander-in-chief of Poland's military, tried desperately to mobilize Polish forces. But his efforts were foiled by the UK and France, who insisted that the Polish offer no provocation to the Germans, and so their army sat idle until the 30th of August, when Ritz-Schmigel finally ordered a general mobilization.
Ooh, and that's August 30th, and the invasion starts on 1st. Then, guessing they're gonna now say Hitler used mobilization as an act of aggression to justify his invasion.
Just one day after general mobilization was ordered in Poland, German troops dressed in Polish uniforms launched a series of false flag attacks against German military and civilian targets. Hitler furiously denounced these supposed Polish attacks in an evening radio broadcast that night, which he used to conceal his real intentions. War was inevitable. Prior to this point, Polish generals had recognized the impossibility of a conventional defensive posture. Their strategy, named Plan.
Although Poland spent a sizable I'll get it eventually. Although Poland spent a sizable portion of its national budget on defense, it only amounted to 1/15 of Germany. So I think he never talked about it. I'm going to mention it, and of course it's something that's always talked about when it comes to World War II. It's the French and mainly British stance of appeasement. So of course, it's understandable when you look at it from the British and French side of it, especially if you look at it from French. This idea of appeasement happened because World War I was still fresh in the mind. Like, the people leading these countries now, for the most part, a lot of them served in World War I. They were alive when World War I happened, and they heard about the death tolls that were happening. They did not want to see that again. So it's understandable to take the stance. With that added context, can't really blame them for taking a stance. Now, of course, with hindsight, how crazy fucking Hitler is, appeasement would not have worked. We know that now. Of course, back then, appeasement is understandable. As long as, you know, address the context of World War I still looms back of all their minds. It's been 20 years since 9/11. That has not left the minds of many people. And actually, fun fact, when I am recording this actually on 20th anniversary of 9/11. Yeah, like, you know, this is also only, this is like 24, 25 years since the end. Well, 21 years, September 1st, 1939. That, yeah, just a little over, around 21 years since the end of World War I. That is still fresh in them. That is definitely still fresh in the minds of the British and French. The concept of appeasement, understand.
Plan West was instead to delay German forces at the frontiers, while falling back to a defensive line along the major rivers. There, they hoped to hold the line until their allies launched an invasion of Germany. The success of Plan West depended entirely on Britain and France upholding their guarantees. Poland's military strategists, headed by Marshal Ritz, did not think that their allies would simply sit back and watch them succumb to the Third Reich. Yet, there were some, like Chief of the General Staff Wacław Stachewicz, who had doubts about the plan's feasibility. Inside the Polish headquarters in Warsaw, we can imagine a conversation like this taking place.
Patrzyłem na te mapy godzinami, Ritz.
I've been staring at these maps for hours.
Ale fakty pozostają niezmienne. Plan operacyjny
West is riddled with flaws.
Doceniam twoją troskę, ale co możemy w tym momencie zmienić?
What can we possibly change at this point?
Moglibyśmy skoncentrować
nasze
nasze siły
along the river,
gdzie
where they'd be less vulnerable to encirclement.
To ułatwiłoby
that would shorten our supply lines and make coordination for the whole army.
To ważne spostrzeżenie.
That is a valid
ale
point.
Cofając się tak
But by
daleko,
back so far, we would be abandoning
ziemię
the West.
zachodnie. Cały ten teren i jego
All that
populacja,
territory,
zasoby,
population, resources,
przemysł.
and industry.
Nie możemy pozwolić
We
Niemcom
can't let the
zająć ich
Germans
bez
seize it all
walki.
without a fight.
Nie pozostanie nam nic
We
do
won't have
obrony,
anything left to
jeśli
defend if
będziemy
we
się
stick to this
trzymać
strategy.
tej strategii.
Możliwe.
But we
Ale
only
musimy
need to hold
wytrzymać
the line
tylko do
until our
czasu, gdy
allies come
sojusznicy
to our
przyjdą nam
aid.
z pomocą.
A co jeśli
What
Brytyjczycy
if
i
British and
Francuzi
French do not
nie
attack?
zaatakują?
Zaatakują.
They will.
Muszą.
They have.
Jest zbyt późno, by zmieniać
too late
teraz
to
kierunek
change course
naszych
now.
działań.
Plan West
Plan
is our
operacyjny
best
Zachód jest naszą ostatnią nadzieją.
Yeah.
At the outbreak
It
of
was also their own
war, the Polish army had mobilized only about 500,000 men, of which half were combat ready.
German army had up to 1.5 million men at the outbreak of.
Throughout the war, an additional 500,000 men would be raised, many of whom could have been mustered much earlier had the British and French not discouraged Polish mobilization. By September 1939, the army was organized.
I've never heard that actually. The British and French discouraged Polish mobilization. That was never taught.
Into 26 infantry divisions, 8 cavalry brigades, 1 motorized brigade, 3 mountain brigades, 2 armored brigades, and 4 independent tank battalions. The soldiers were
Germany had around 2,750 tanks, 6 divisions by the time of invasion.
Reasonably motivated and disciplined, but they were poorly equipped due to Poland's relative poverty, with obsolete communication systems and a lack of motorized transport. Although,
yeah, so Poland at this time, and I think also kind of largely still today, I'm not too sure, I could be wrong, but I think Poland is very still, at least now, as we're seeing on this map, a pretty agricultural country, much like Russia. Was at the time too, not so industrialized, mainly just food, agriculture stuff. Yeah, that, of course, if your economy is based largely on agriculture, does, at least in terms of the modern day now, mean poor.
So, unlike what propaganda footage shows, the German army was not heavily motorized or mechanized either, and both sides relied heavily on horses. On the ground, Poland's
7 to Panowie? I know the W in Polish is pronounced like the V English. Panowie Polski. 37mm gun, nice. 9.9 tons. Max speed of 37, nice. 517mm armor of 3. Small tank.
The latest tank was the 7TP, whose 37mm gun could easily knock out the Panzer I or Panzer II, and even destroy the Panzer IV.
Boom. I love that animation.
Unfortunately, the 7TP was a rare sight on the battlefield. Only 161 were in service by 1939.
That's not good.
A much more common sight was Poland's 575 TKS.
The fucking that thing is tiny. How did 2 people fit in that? It looks like 1 person would barely fit.
Tankettes. While completely adorable, these tiny vehicles were barely more useful than armored cars, and often less reliable. Lastly,
unlike Germany, Poland dispersed most of its tanks among the infantry cavalry, limiting its ability to launch concentrated counterattacks. So that is also a strategy that the French take as well, where the tanks are kind of more dispersed along infantry cavalry, not so much combined, just full tank brigade.
The Poles had also purchased 88 tanks from their British and French allies prior to the war.
Nice.
In the skies, the Polish Air Force had fewer than 400 modern aircraft.
And the Germans had around 2,315.
Poland's latest fighter, the P-24, was highly competitive with foreign planes when it was introduced in 1936, but it was outclassed by the time of the invasion.
Not nice.
To make matters worse, Poland had exported many P-24s to other countries, leaving few for national defense. Thus, the Polish Air Force had to rely primarily on obsolete P-11s.
Well, that's not good.
Finally, at sea, the Polish Navy consisted of just 5 submarines and 4 destroyers, as well as various smaller vessels.
Yeah, the Germans had 4 battleships, 11 cruisers, 21 destroyers, and 57 subs.
Luckily, before the German attack, most destroyers retreated to England, while the submarines were ordered to mine the Polish coast around Danzig and interdict enemy ships attempting to stage amphibious landings.
Nice.
At 4:45 a.m. on September 1st, 1939, the German invasion began with the pre-dreadnought Schleswig-Holstein bombarding a military depot in Danzig. Warrant Officer Władysław Baron recalled of the attack. The air rocked. Fountains of sand, stones, and smoke rose up. Shattered trunks and branches of trees, pieces of human bodies, and weapons flew in the air. As the sun rose, Marshal Ritz Schmiegel's worst fears were confirmed, as German armored spearheads punched straight through the confused Polish lines with barely a pause. Army Group North attacked the Polish corridor. Army Group South attacked Łódź, Krakow.
Ritz's last-ditch mobilization efforts managed to scrape together a few positions. This too little, too.
And Warsaw, and forces from the German puppet state of Slovakia attacked Poland's southern regions. Lieutenant Jan Karski detailed his division's ordeal. The extent of death, destruction, and disorganization this combined fire caused in 3 short hours was incredible. By the time our wits were sufficiently collected even to survey the situation, it was apparent that we were in no position to offer any serious resistance. By the end of September 2nd, the Polish defenses had fallen apart. Nonetheless, some units resisted fiercely, especially the Polish cavalry brigades, considered the elite units of the Polish military. Far from charging into battle solely armed with sabers and lances, these modern cavalrymen also carried bolt-action rifles, anti-tank rifles, and machine guns, giving them access to some of the most concentrated firepower of the early war period.
Nice.
At the Battle of Mokra, the Wałęsa
No, Polish cavalry did not ever deliberately launch charges against German tanks.
cavalry brigade destroyed at least 50 German tanks and inflicted some 800 casualties in one of the only Polish victories of the war. When not fighting directly, the Polish cavalry acted as a mobile reserve, galloping to the front lines and then dismounting to fight as infantry. Polish armored trains also mounted considerable resistance and wreaked havoc on enemy supply lines and communications, using the country's extensive rail network and forests for cover. Discounted by the Germans as obsolete, these self-sustaining behemoths, which came in light and heavy varieties, bristled with artillery pieces and machine guns. Overall, the 10 or so armored...
Imagine just you're like driving your tank along through Polish land. You're coming up towards a railroad, and then out of nowhere, just long distance, you're and it's just a fucking armored ass train coming down. And you just drive by, shoots you, and then it keeps going. Fucking awesome.
Trains fought in about 90 battles during the invasion. On September 3rd, Britain and France finally declared war on Germany after repeated pleas from Polish diplomats. The Polish people were overjoyed with the news, but no military support was forthcoming. Polish forces continued losing ground on all fronts, and on September 5th, armies Kraków, Łódź, Prusa, and Poznan withdrew beyond the Vistula and Duniec rivers, abandoning western Poland. Unfortunately, the rivers had almost completely dried up due to drought, so they posed...
Yo, that is just some shit fucking luck. And they... the drought. No.
No obstacle to the German advance. To make matters worse, fleeing refugees clogged the roads, hampering efforts to contain the enemy breakthrough. Desperate for any assistance, Poland urged its allies to attack.
French outnumbered the Germans more than 5-1, yes. Yes, they did.
Germany's extremely weak western front. France responded by launching an offensive into the Saar region of Germany on September 7th. Just as the Poles had hoped, early reports told of French making remarkable progress, capturing towns and overwhelming all German resistance. Once the British joined in, the Germans would have no choice but to divert forces to the west, and Poland would be saved. But then, on the 13th, the unthinkable occurred. The French, despite their crushing momentum, halted their advance. Days later, they pulled back to the relative safety of the Maginot Line.
Still makes no fucking sense. Still, like... This is the one thing that I, even with the added context of the time period, this still makes no sense to me. Like, I mean, you know where the German military... You should know where the German military is. I feel like they also... Maybe he's going to clear this up. I don't know. But, like, you're making all this progress into the... where the industrial heartland of Germany is. This area is... where the fucking industry of Germany is at this point in time. The Rhineland. And you're not... That's the one thing that, like, I don't get why the French pulled back.
The news came like a slap in the face to the Poles. Without the help of their allies, Plan West was utterly ruined. One of the few bright spots in this otherwise dark time was the aerial defense of Warsaw. Between September 1st and the 6th, Polish fighters and anti-aircraft guns downed 80 German bombers and damaged more than 20 others. However, the situation deteriorated as the Germans escalated their bombing campaign. On September 10th, enemy bombers carried out 17 consecutive bombing raids, overwhelming the Polish defenses. Meanwhile, enemy tanks were closing in on the capital. The Poles were prepared for this, thanks to the effort of over 150,000 civilian volunteers who had labored for weeks to prepare a network of anti-tank ditches and improvised barricades, transforming Warsaw into a fortress. On September 8th, the Polish defenders watched with a mix of fear and steely resolve as German tanks appeared on the horizon. The attack began in the south, as panzers overran several suburbs. But when the Germans attacked from the west, the Poles pushed them back from behind their makeshift barricades. When the Germans came again on the 9th with reinforcements in tow, the stubborn Poles repelled them again. Between these two assaults, the Poles destroyed 80 tanks and successfully denied the enemy further access to the western suburbs. As the battle raged on, the Poles made up for their shortage of anti-tank weapons with sheer ingenuity. For example, they covered a street with turpentine and lit it on fire when enemy tanks got close enough. Some Poles even lit mattresses on fire and hurled them onto the Germans from balconies.
That's fucking hilarious,
Yet
dude.
Everywhere around Warsaw, Poland's defenses were collapsing. On the 10th, Fritz ordered a general retreat toward the Romanian bridgehead. To relieve Army Łódź, Armies Poznan and Pomorze counterattacked the left flank of the German forces attacking Warsaw between the 19th and the 15th. Although they were initially successful, low morale, poor coordination between units, and enemy air superiority turned the Battle of Żuraw into a crushing defeat, as the Germans encircled and destroyed them between the 15th and 19th. Polish defenses along the Narew River collapsed on the 12th, allowing the Germans to advance toward Warsaw from the east and lay siege to the city 3 days later. Combined with the survivors of the Battle of Żuraw, the defenders of Warsaw now numbered 140,000 soldiers. Opposing them were 175,000 Germans, supported by 1,000 artillery pieces and over 1,000 aircraft. For an entire week, the Poles endured a night and day bombardment as the Germans prepared to storm the city. However, on the 15th of September, the Warsaw garrison managed to repel all attacks on the Praga suburb and 2 full-scale attacks on the 23rd and 26th. As the siege continued, strange reports began arriving from the east. Soviet forces were pouring across the border, and the Germans were retreating before them. To the beleaguered defenders of Lvov, this meant salvation. After enduring a grueling siege by German forces, the city opened its gates to the Red Army without hesitation. No. But even as Polish citizens prepared to celebrate with their unlikely saviors, the horrible truth was revealed. The Soviets were not here to help, but merely to take their share of the spoils. It was at this point that the Polish High Command lost confidence in the defense of the country, so it fled to the border of Romania to the small town of Kudi. Abandoned by their leadership, the remaining Polish forces had no idea how to react to the Soviet invasion. Some units continued fighting, but they could not stop the twin juggernauts from squeezing the life out of Poland.
Bombardment leveled around 10% of all buildings in Warsaw. Another 40% heavily damaged. Fighting.
On September 27th, after 3 weeks of staunch resistance, the Warsaw garrison finally surrendered in the face of the near-complete destruction of the city. One later wrote, "We listened silently to these grim words. There were no questions or comments. Our minds recognized the inevitability of capitulation, but our feelings could not be reconciled to it. Was this to be the end?" Fighting continued on October 6th as the Germans and Soviets eliminated the last pockets of resistance. The brave but unsuccessful defense of Poland came at a steep price. Poland sustained between 880,000 and 1,253,000 casualties. Germany sustained between 44,000 and 51,400, and the USSR between 3,800 and 13,000 during the invasion. Nevertheless, about 100,000 Polish soldiers managed to escape, and they would go on to join the Allied war effort, seeing action throughout the remainder of the Second World War. In November 1939, the Polish government in exile announced that it would fight for the restoration of Poland. Despite their resentment towards Britain and France for failing to come to their aid in the invasion,
they were still the only options that they had at restoring the government.
They agreed to cooperate with them and organize a resistance movement within their occupied country. This culminated in the heroic but doomed Warsaw Uprising, a fascinating topic for a future video. Despite their devastating loss in the invasion, the fight for Poland was far from over.
Alright, yeah, they did a good job. The animators, shout out to those, god, those animators, amazing. Writers and producers. That was a fucking good video. I've got nothing else to add here at the end of this video. I feel like I said what I needed to say throughout. That was the invasion of Poland from the Polish perspective by Animated History by Armchair Historian. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.